Intelligence, that human trait you get mocked for having too little or too much, seen by some as a kind of superpower that few have and can understand, almost as if being more intelligent allowed them to see the matrix code hidden in every aspect of life. Fantasy and reality mix to tell seemingly contradictory stories: smart people who do stupid things, fools who know how to be perceived as intelligent, mad geniuses, or how intelligence serves as a measure of success in life, while at the same time facilitating the onset of some mental illnesses like anxiety and depression. Starting with something quite striking, is it true that very intelligent people are intimidating? Yes and no. Intelligence by itself doesn't intimidate anyone. It's the one who has more knowledge on the subject at hand that can make it intimidating. So a mathematician can be intimidating to a writer, and a writer intimidating to a mathematician. And curiously, both can do it in the same way, using expressions or words they know the other will almost certainly not understand. What is true is that one condition must be met. The field or profession has to be perceived as intellectual, because no matter how much knowledge a farmer or an actor has, it's very difficult for someone to feel intimidated. The same thing happens with the cliché, intelligent women intimidate men. You find an obscene number of articles with headlines like, "Don't worry if you're single, it's a sign that you're intelligent," and things like that, very much of our era. You're never the problem, it's the rest of the world that doesn't adapt to you. Which I've always thought, what sense does that make? For every intelligent woman, there's an intelligent man. It's just complaining about not knowing where to look. It's like going fishing in the Dead Sea every day and blaming it for not having any fish. Besides, that's only half true. In 2019, the paper Is Intelligence Sexy was published. And it's true that when a heterosexual man isn't looking for a long-term relationship, he prefers his partner to be less intelligent. But regardless of gender, anyone, man or woman, prefers an equally or more intelligent partner if they're thinking about a long-term relationship. The study ends with a rather obvious conclusion. Neither extreme is good. People with very low intelligence are avoided because they bring social and biological problems if you're thinking of having children with that person, and likewise if your partner is exaggeratedly more intelligent than you, not in general, but compared to you, it brings feelings of inferiority and insecurity, thinking that you're not good enough and that at any moment they'll find someone better. So the saying shouldn't be, intelligent people are intimidating, but rather, the very basic are easily intimidated. So, to no one's surprise, the most intellectually balanced couples are the most satisfying. As they say, there's nothing like the friendship between two fools, sincere and fun. Well, it's the same with couples. And of course, none of the above matters if the looks or personality don't match. As you can see, saying you don't have a partner because you're intelligent is, to put it mildly, stupid. Tell me what you're like, let me see how you interact, and you'll be surprised to learn that maybe you don't have a partner because you're simply ugly or your personality sucks. And considering they say they don't have a partner because they're intelligent, that's a little clue as to which it might be. This is one of the many exaggerations or even myths behind intelligence popularized by our universal desire to perceive ourselves as more intelligent than we really are. It's like the equivalent of body positivity, but for personality. It's easier to accept that you're intelligent and that you intimidate others than to think you're conceited, arrogant, and egocentric who thinks they're always right or that their opinion matters more. Nah, it couldn't be that, right? It's because you're very intelligent. Another of these exaggerations is about mad geniuses, as if we needed another one. Some examples. Van Gogh. In his final years, he was drowning in a depression that, combined with his very likely bipolar disorder, sometimes prevented him from painting, and at other times made him paint with too much energy and enthusiasm. In the end, one day he showed up with a gunshot wound to the chest, saying he had shot himself, and died 2 days later at 37 years old. Not to mention, of course, that he supposedly painted his hallucinations or that he decided having only one ear was more aerodynamic. Edgar Allan Poe. There is no use reasoning with me now. I can't go on. I must die. Since I published Eureka, I have no desire to continue living. I can't finish anything else. He tried to take his own life by drinking laudanum, a painkiller, but in the attempt he vomited it up before it could have any effect. His death was as strange as was morbidly fitting for a character like Poe. One day he was seen walking down the street wearing clothes that weren't his, delirious, disoriented, and very distressed. He couldn't remember anything, what he had done, or what had been done to him to get that way. Beethoven. Beethoven's deafness turned him into a very irritable person. A comment at the wrong time could make him fly into a rage. Perhaps that's why it's thought that, in addition to the obvious depression he also suffered from, he had bipolar disorder. And yes, he also planned to take his own life.
Herman Melville. A person unsympathetic to the writer might describe Melville as a failed novelist with a low-level government job. He drank too much, mercilessly interrupted his wife about household chores, occasionally hit her and distracted the children with his unpredictable behavior. A sympathetic observer might describe him as an unappreciated genius, a visionary. Melville was both. Already a strong-willed person by nature, when he drank, he became even more unbearable. His wife finally decided to divorce him, saying he was insane. Leonardo da Vinci. 500 years after his death, Da Vinci is still one of the first names that comes to mind when you think of mad geniuses. Recognized in life, more so in death, and much more so over time. His problem, unlike the others, wasn't depression or addiction, but ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's not 100% confirmed at all, but that diagnosis would fit the personality they described. Giorgio Vasari, who wrote his biography, said, "In learning and the basics of letters, he would have achieved great skill if he had not been so variable and unstable, setting out to learn many things and after starting them, abandoning them. The Last Supper, according to Leonardo, is not finished. He had to consider it finished because of the difficulties at the time. St. Jerome in the Wilderness is also unfinished. He confessed in his diary that of all the works he did for the Duke of Milan, none were ever finished. And it took him 16 years to finish the Mona Lisa, because whenever he started working, he would think about his other projects. He would abandon what he was doing and focus on something else until another idea jumped into his mind and he moved on. It's no wonder they were so surprised when he finished the Mona Lisa, and it's almost certain that deep down he thought he could improve it. That's why The Last Supper is so damaged. A painter, an artist who likes to touch up things endlessly using a technique that requires speed. Pope Leo X said of Leonardo, "Alas, this man will never do anything, for he begins by thinking of the end of the work before he has made a beginning of it." Leonardo himself tormented himself, thinking he never gave enough, always unsatisfied. One of his laments before dying was that he'd offended God and mankind for not having worked at his art as he should have done. Thanks to these details from his biography, a short article called "A Genius Driven to Distraction" speculated on the possibility that Leonardo suffered from ADHD. They also comment on how this disorder, although it harmed him by creating an image of an unreliable artist, could have helped him in other areas. The waterfall of unordered thoughts that those with ADHD suffer from can be a virtue if what you're looking for is creativity and originality. At this point, the disorders can facilitate some cognitive tasks we will also see later on. Virginia Woolf. Her husband, Leonard Woolf, at one point said, "In the manic stage, she was extremely excited. Her mind raced, she talked with volubility, and at the height of the attack incoherently. She had delusions and heard voices. For instance, she told me that in her second attack, she heard the birds in the garden outside her window talking Greek. She was violent with the nurses. In her third attack, which began in 1914, it lasted for several months and ended with her being in a coma for 2 days. She ended up taking her own life when she realized she was beginning to hear voices again, and reading and writing was slowly becoming an impossible task, which is torturous for a writer." Isaac Newton. He's remembered as a very solitary and quite neurotic person. He was constantly meditating and worried about past mistakes. Such was his level of worry and obsession with scientific progress that he developed depression, and at its peak, he had a nervous breakdown in the summer of 1693. Tesla. "I have been feeding pigeons, thousands of them for years, but there was one, a beautiful bird, pure white with light gray tips on its wings. That one was different. It was a female. I had only to wish to call her, and she would come flying to me. I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life. From this, the idea was born that he had fallen in love with the pigeon, although it might just be a misinterpretation from trying to use an overly poetic expression. A very solitary, asocial person, what he enjoyed was locking himself away and working on his ideas. He did have a few friends, but at the end of his life he regretted a little not having had a partner, considering that perhaps the price for having dedicated himself entirely to his work had been too high. He died, as it could not be otherwise, alone in a hotel room with the "Do Not Disturb" sign.
If you were to look only at these cases, you would only be seeing one side of the coin, and it would deceive you into thinking you have to suffer from some kind of disorder to stand out. But if you wanted to, you could make the same list, or an even longer one, with sane geniuses, if you want to call them that. Mozart. In stark contrast to Da Vinci, he worked with great energy, finishing his works on very short deadlines. His greatest misfortune was the poverty he suffered from most of his life, only gaining some prestige before his death. Stephen Hawking. His was a physical illness, confined to a wheelchair, unable to move, speak, and barely able to show emotions, and yet he was saner than most. And of course, it was only a matter of time before he showed up, Einstein, and the list could go on and on. These are very few examples, but a certain pattern can begin to be intuited. It's the artists, not the scientists, who are most affected, with writers and poets being the most affected within the group of artists. Let's not forget that at all times when we say mad, we are talking about mental illnesses, or in the best cases, personality disorders. And when we say genius, we mean innovative, creative, and talented in their field, not necessarily an intellectual. So seeing all this, is it more likely that geniuses suffer from some kind of mental disorder? Or do we exaggerate the stories because we love duality? It's complicated. The second one is true. Clearly, a good story always reaches more people. Besides, there's the added factor that we want them to be true, because it would mean that your disorders have a positive side, a kind of sign that you're a genius without knowing it. But it's impossible not to know it. It would be like being completely soaked and not knowing if it's raining. If you doubt it or can be convinced that you have a hidden genius inside you, that doesn't say anything good about your intelligence. As for the first, it could be. As I mentioned before, with ADHD, many hypotheses have been proposed arguing that, while not all, some of these disorders could help in the creative process, always understanding that in excess it can turn around and incapacitate you. Like when Van Gogh was unable to paint, or Poe felt he couldn't create anything else after Eureka. You also have to consider one thing. Is it the artist who, as an artist, develops these neuroses? Or is it the person who, seeing they have creative facility due to their neurosis, selects art as their path in life? Both can happen, of course, but I'd say the second is more frequent. If we consider, for example, Da Vinci's biography as told by Vasari, from a young age he already had that distracted mind, which helped him to become interested in everything they wanted to teach him. But he never managed to correct it, so over time it harmed him, affecting his reliability in finishing commissions. Of course, to begin with, you have to have a taste for art. Otherwise, you'll simply be a person with a disorder. Like ADHD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and even anxiety and depression have also been proposed. In general, all those illnesses that go hand in hand with neurosis, causing the person to have more obsessive thoughts, this would have the virtue of being a tireless source for solving creative problems, because it would allow them to anchor themselves on a point until it's resolved, being much more persistent than the average person. But at the same time, it has the same power to make you feel miserable no matter what you've achieved, and to die believing you've failed humanity, as happened to poor Leonardo. But here there's a bit of controversy. Following all these stories, numerous studies emerged showing that all those illnesses popularly proposed to enhance creativity, in fact, do not, seeing that among that group there aren't more creative people. But then you see that among writers there are, I think it was 50 or 60% more cases and 80% more among poets. So what's going on? The way I see it, they're talking about different things. Some try to debunk that these illnesses make you more creative, and others show there's a connection, although they're stumbling in the dark to figure out what it is. Perhaps, as I just said, these illnesses make them more obsessive, but not necessarily more creative. So if a person who is already talented and interested in art becomes obsessive, the result is a person who spends 16 years painting one picture. If we focus purely on intelligence, we see that, in its own way, it's also connected to many of the previous illnesses. The idea that connects high intelligence with mental illnesses like depression and anxiety is not new. The simplified idea is that these gifted people, thanks to their high awareness, are hyper-reactive to stimuli, meaning they react with more intensity. This would manifest at the age of 6 to 11, reacting emotionally with more intensity the more intelligent they are, which causes more stressful situations. Of course, it can happen to anyone, because what's important in this case isn't the intelligence, but the intensity with which one reacts, both emotionally and behaviorally. What studies like this want to show is a connection between two ideas. Hyper-reactive people are more prone to developing these disorders, and people with a high IQ tend to be more hyper-reactive. So at no point do they say it can't happen the other way around. And it does. Other studies have shown that, in fact, if a person has a very low intelligence score, they also have a higher chance of developing these disorders. For a time, I saw that as a contradiction, but it doesn't have to be. Both the gifted and the, let's say, limited have problems with managing emotions for different reasons, but leading to the same problems. Because it's precisely from a continuous mismanagement of emotions that many of the psychological problems they will develop in adulthood are born. Anxiety and depression in different degrees, and perhaps less importantly, tics and manias. In case there's any doubt, suicide is in no way linked to high intelligence or genius. It's linked to other independent factors: stress, financial difficulties, illnesses like depression, it's true. But considering you can develop it at any point in your life for a million reasons, you couldn't relate it solely to intelligence. In this case, just the fact of being a man or a woman is a more decisive factor than intelligence. You see, very intelligent children do have that problem I mentioned at the beginning, that of intimidating. It happens to them because at those ages, between 7 and 11, they don't know where the boundaries are. And it takes them a while to understand that, as a general rule, people don't like it when you point out or correct every sentence they say, especially if it's a topic where it's not important to be so meticulous. Hopefully, the child will grow up learning how to relate depending on the person in front of them, and it's important that they learn because the rest of the world isn't going to change for what is, in fact, a minority, and much less so if they are children or adolescents who are not exactly known for their tact. I came across this one titled "The Myth of the Antisocial Genius," and we're going to see how this and similar works made a mistake. It says that to debunk the myth, they surveyed 287 Mensa members and gave them a questionnaire, finding that despite what the myth said, they were wonderful, very empathetic and responsible people who liked to participate socially, with a lot of interest and a great desire to learn and work with other people, them more and better. So right off the bat, we see that the result was obtained not by observing, but by asking. That's the first problem, but it's not even the most important one. The most important one is that you're surveying people who voluntarily took a test to be part of a social group, and you're asking them if they are socially adept. If they are in Mensa, they already have the desire to be part of a group, and they also have the enough vanity to want a document that certifies their intellectual superiority. Let's just say the topic of them being Mensa members will magically come up in conversations. But the point is, it's obvious they are socially functional when they voluntarily become members of an organization. And whether it's because they want to be part of the group or they want to show off their intellectual ego, they have to be somewhat social.
The antisocial intelligent person you're looking for hasn't taken the test to get into Mensa because they don't want to get into Mensa, and they don't care about a document that says how smart they are because they don't plan on telling or showing it to anyone. And to top it all, would they volunteer to take a survey? In any case, it serves to show that gifted intelligence can be a reason for social exclusion like any other, but it will depend on the emotional education they receive in their youth that will make the difference. While we're at it, let's debunk some real myths. Despite the widespread belief and the poorly told story that Einstein was a bad student, being very intelligent doesn't make you lose interest in school and therefore fail. Like before, this is one of those myths believed simply because it makes you feel better, and just as importantly, it makes you feel special, unique. That our lack of motivation, again, has a good side. Otherwise, you'd have to admit there's a problem elsewhere. It's proven time and time again that it's not true, but the desire to feel that our stupidity is less than that of others is more powerful. Motivation. The reason intelligent people do well in school, and as a general rule in life, is because they find motivation more easily.
Partly because of the main trait that every intelligent person shares. Very basic, very powerful, and unfortunately, it can't be taught. Having curiosity. Motivation and curiosity, two characteristics that depression destroys. Maybe that's why they saw that the same person will score differently on intelligence tests, depending on their mental health. Being lower, the worse off they are. That's how important it is. Here you find another interesting point. Motivation and curiosity combined result in being more open to new experiences and ideas, resulting in a new contradiction and a drawback when you apply that trait to society. First, the contradiction. When you compare conservative and progressive people, you find that in the latter group there are more intelligent people. Their personalities are more drawn to things that propose new ideas.
So far, we've covered what we might call classic intelligence, the ability to recognize patterns, make connections, and use logical thinking to solve problems. Then there's emotional intelligence, which involves having the tools to manage and control both your own emotions and those of others. Though it's not necessarily about being empathetic, empathy is a separate trait. Lastly, we have social intelligence, or, if you prefer, common sense. The first type helps you solve a numerical sequence. The second helps you manage stress. And the third helps you understand why it's not always best to correct the last words of a dying person. A very exaggerated example, of course, but there are many subtler situations like this. These kinds of situations aren't resolved by classic or emotional intelligence alone. They require an understanding of appropriate social behavior within a specific context. The problem is not necessarily something to solve, but rather something to understand. The contradiction happens when someone with a lot of intelligence looks at society as a problem that needs solving and applies the same abstract analysis method they're used to. The result is new ideas that others might view as foolish because they fail to take social context into account. It's not that these ideas are illogical, but in many cases they're simply not applicable. Society works like a machine. When you change something, no matter how small, everything else adapts for better or worse. To put it simply, talking about it in broad terms can be confusing, but here's an example: political correctness. In trying to eliminate prejudice and solve social problems, it often ends up creating more prejudice and social problems without fully addressing the original ones.
However, the drawback: infantilism. This is widespread. It affects everyone because it's a side effect of a modern society that rewards the flexibility typical of youth, a rapid adaptation to constant change. And while it has all those advantages, it also retains the defects of an unfinished psychological profile: distracted, easily bored, superficially understanding society. The typical big kid, which can be used as a compliment if you focus on their vitality, always ready to learn new things, or as an insult if you highlight how immature they are in a particular situation. If this phenomenon occurs in a generalized way, it's logical to think that for an intelligent person, the effect is even greater, when by default their curious personality and their long academic years extend that psychological youth even further. Another detail that shows that, for better or for worse, they stand out. It's true that exaggeration is to blame for creating much of the mysticism behind very intelligent people, but that doesn't mean the problems are unreal or less important. It has as many positive aspects as negative ones. By balancing these aspects, that person will find greatness. Otherwise, their fall into decadence will be deeper than the rest of the population can understand. For many, that intelligence is a blessing. But for those who don't know how to stop falling, or who during the fall have found more than enough reasons not to want to stop falling, it will be a curse.